Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you very much for joining us online. We start the program with the recitation of the Quran from Khadij Glamse.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب للعصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much, Khadija. We'll now start the main program, and we're very fortunate to have Professor Jerry Brotton join us again. He joined us a few months ago on talking to us about Elizabeth in England, his previous book, and today he's speaking to us about when was Makkah the center of the map, and talking about Arabic and Islamic mapping. Professor Brotton is a British historian and a professor of Renaissance Studies at Queen Mary University, and he's also a television and radio presenter and curator. He writes on a range of different topics, including literature, history, trade, East-West relations, and employs a number of different interdisciplinary approaches. And his book, A History of the World in 12 Maps, has been translated into 12 languages and is accompanied by a 3-part series on BBC4. So hopefully this will be really interesting. So Jerry, please go ahead.
Hello, Mikdad, and thank you everybody for joining me. And it's great to be back in a way, but back virtually, rather than when I was last with you physically at the mosque, which was a kind of extraordinary experience. For me, it was wonderful and a very moving and sort of powerful event to come and speak to the community about what were really, I guess, Anglo-Islamic relations in the 16th and early 17th century, talking about Shakespeare. I still need to thank Mikdad because he drove me all the way back to Oxford afterwards. We had an extraordinary evening. I stayed for 2 or 3 hours, and the hospitality was wonderful. So I'm really sorry that we couldn't do it in person again, but I'm sure that we'll be able to do it in the future. But virtually, we'll make do at the moment. What I want to talk to you about tonight, because it came up in the last time that I came to the mosque in conversations, was the history of maps and also the importance of Arabic and Islamic map making in the broader history of maps and geography, and it's something I've always been fascinated by. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is precisely this subject, the way in which, again, I feel, as I was saying the last time that we met, that there's been an omission in history about the importance of Arabic and Islamic culture. Last time I spoke, it was about English history in the 16th and 17th century. This is going to go back even further. I'm going to be talking about great maps from the early period of Islam, where, as far as I can see, Islam was driving forward certain views of how to map the world in the 10th, 11th,
He doesn't have
12th
his presentation,
century.
yeah? I'm just about
And I'll
to
be
put his
using
presentation.
Christian
Right,
days,
so
obviously, so when I refer to the 12th century AD.
I've made it louder.
using the
Is it
Christian
not
calendar,
louder?
and that's an
That's as
interesting
loud as I can
issue
make
around the fact that at this time, of course, there were collisions of different accounts of time and also theology, but where people were sharing ideas. But certainly, it seems to me, Islam and Arabic map makers were at the forefront of how people were mapping the world. So what I want to do is to show you some of the maps, which I think are extraordinary. They give you an amazing insight into this period of history, and how predominantly Arabic map makers, I'm going to start with an Arabic map maker in a moment, were so important to creating these amazing images of the world. I'm going to start with this image, so hopefully you can see this. Amar, jump in if there are any problems here. What you're seeing on the screen here is, I think, one of the most important but actually lost pieces of map making from the 12th century. This is a silver disc, would you believe, which has been recreated more recently. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But what you're looking at is the recreation in silver, in pure silver, of a disc that shows the world in its entirety, dated to 1154 AD. And this was made by an Arabic mapmaker called Muhammad al-Idrisi. And Idrisi came from North Africa, from modern-day Morocco, was educated in Spain in the 1130s, 1140s, and then travelled to Sicily, would you believe, to work with a French, Norman, Christian king. And while he was there, and this is what I'm going to be talking about as well as other maps, he made this amazing silver disc. This was being recreated more recently, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. But look at this. I'm assuming that it looks very unfamiliar to you. What I'm going to do is turn it the other way up. Now, if we look at this silver disc the other way up, what you can now see, hopefully, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see in the top left-hand corner, there is the UK. This is Europe. That is Italy. This is North Africa. So we're looking at Morocco here, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt. And here in the Arabian Peninsula, down here, I've given an arrow there pointing to Mecca. Okay. So this is an Arabic mapmaker working here in the Mediterranean, in Sicily, in the 1140s and 1150s, creating this most extraordinary object, which when he made it would have looked like that the other way up, with south at the top, right, and north down here. So if you can see what I was just showing you, again, you've got the United Kingdom down here in the bottom right, the Mediterranean here, North Africa here, and actually all of this up here, amazingly, is not sea as it might seem, but is actually land. So this is sub-Saharan Africa, with a sense in which you can't get around Africa. So there's an encircling ocean all the way around. And again, here we have the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian Ocean. Okay, so I'll just again turn that map the other way up. So this is where I'm starting. I'm starting by thinking about the importance of this kind of map. Muhammad al-Idrisi working in Sicily
in the 1140s, 1150s, a moment where in Sicily, a French Norman Christian king, this guy called Roger II, employs Idrisi. And he employs Idrisi because he knows that a cosmopolitan, sophisticated Arab scholar, born in North Africa, educated in Spain, in Al-Andalus, actually in Cordoba, who has traveled across the known world, which Idrisi has, is exactly the kind of person that he wants to create this kind of extraordinary map, this silver disc. And I'm going to come back in a while to the significance of it as a silver disc. I recently showed this. It's amazing, isn't it, how quickly things have happened. So at the end of February, I spoke in Abu Dhabi at a literary festival, and we took a copy of this silver disc to Abu Dhabi, and the response was extraordinary and rather overwhelming. To speak to an audience in Abu Dhabi, to talk about a 12th century Arab mapmaker leading the world in how to map it at this time, and to actually show it in the Arabian Peninsula was something really rather remarkable and moving. Of course, it already seems a lifetime ago in terms of being able to travel somewhere like Abu Dhabi after what happened. That was just before C-19 started really having an impact. So anyway, that's a sort of interesting story about what I think is still very important about talking about these maps and people like Idrisi, because for an audience in Abu Dhabi, who were many of whom hadn't heard of Idrisi, this seemed to me very important to remind that kind of audience of the importance of somebody like Idrisi. And indeed, that if you look at that map, and if you look at roughly, we're talking about when Mecca was the center of the world, look at the center of this map. The center of the map is the Arabian Peninsula. And that makes absolute sense for somebody like Idrisi. And interestingly, it makes sense for somebody like Roger II living in Sicily, commissioning somebody like Idrisi to make this kind of map. He would have understood that that was at the center of that known world. So just to say that this was a map that was shown at an exhibition that I did recently. So just a quick sip of water. This was an exhibition which is recently finished at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And it was called Talking Maps, and I curated it with the head of maps at the Bodleian, a man called Nick Millay. And one of the things that we were talking about was the way in which maps tell stories. But one of the other key elements of the exhibition was to talk about the importance of Islamic and Arabic mapmaking, and that this has been to some extent neglected in the broader history about how we talk about maps, mapmaking, geography, and images of the world. And you may see here, just in the description of the exhibition, this is also Al-Idrisi. This is a world map by Idrisi. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So the exhibition was to talk about the stories that maps tell, to say that maps aren't just about, that maps are not just scientific objects that get you from one place to the other. They also tell stories about theology. They tell a story about politics. They tell stories about many things, about where we are, who we are in the world. And so this was an attempt to understand anew different cultural traditions and how some of them have been neglected. And it seems to me that a key one had been the tradition of Arabic mapmaking. It was also a sense of asking, when I showed you that silver disc at the beginning and I said I'm turning it the other way up, what was interesting is that we have now come to assume in any world maps that north is at the top. So we look at a map and we see the North Pole is roughly at the top, Europe is somewhere near that top, and then you have the equator, and then you have sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, sort of bottom right. North is usually at the top. There is no reason why that should be so. And what I'm going to show you is that in early Islamic mapmaking, south is at the top, as is the case with that silver disc that I just showed you. And there is no reason why north should necessarily be at the top. It is quite okay to have south at the top as well. There's no natural reason, because we live on a globe. There's no privileging of north, south, east, or west on a globe, is there? On a flat rectangular map, you of course have to make decisions on that basis. So what I'm going to show you now are some, I think, key maps from this period, but that also show us different ways in which different cultures put north, east, south, or west at the top. So this is an interesting image. So I'm going to be leading you back into the early Arabic maps, but let's start by looking at some early Christian maps. So this is a world map from the 14th century AD. And if you can see here in this Christian tradition, Jerusalem is here. You see there, Jerusalem. Actually, what's at the very center of the map is Delos, which is a Greek island, which is an inheritance of classical culture. But interestingly, Jerusalem is here, but east is at the top. So you would actually have to turn the map 45 degrees around. And because what you'd see is that, again, Europe is down here. There you see Africa. So east here is at the top, west is at the bottom. That's called the Pillars of Hercules. That's actually Gibraltar. So Christian maps at this time have east at the top, and they do that because, as in the case with this map, this is the Hereford Mappamundi. It's from Hereford Cathedral. It's anonymous, so it's known as the Hereford Mappamundi. Mappamundi from the Latin meaning world map, Mappamundi, the map of the world. Again, looking at this, east is again at the top. This is east. You can see here the Red Sea, which is helpfully coloured red. At the very centre of this map, we're going to be coming to looking at maps that have Mecca at the centre in a moment. At the centre of this map is Jerusalem. And above it is the image of the crucifixion of Christ. So this is a map according to Christian theology, which is really telling the story about biblical time. If you could zoom in on this, this is a representation of the Garden of Eden and shows Adam and Eve. And then you move down through what we would call the east to Jerusalem, through to the Mediterranean, and down here right to the bottom, Gibraltar. So again, if you looked, slightly turned your head this way, this would be North Africa, this would be Europe, and this is Africa going all the way down here to the Red Sea and this encircling water. So in this tradition, in the Christian tradition, east is at the top. Now, from the Greek tradition, north seems to be at the top. This is from a Greek mapmaker called Ptolemy. He was working quite late, 150 AD in the Christian calendar. So this is a reproduction from 1300 AD of a world map that he creates, but we think this is the geography of somebody working in 150 AD. And you can see here's the UK, here's Spain, Europe, Italy, North Africa, moving along here, the Indian Ocean, presumably Sri Lanka. And notice here, though, interestingly, this is all sub-Saharan Africa. The idea here is that you can't get round Africa. This is all land. Yeah? And that's interesting because we're going to see that Muhammad al-Idrisi understands this because he's been reading Ptolemy. Fantastic, fascinating that he's so well read. He's drawing on the early Islamic tradition of map making. He's also drawing on the Romans and the Greeks. Amazing. So this is Ptolemy. So this is the classical tradition. I love showing this to audiences who are maybe not so familiar with this early history of mapping. This, would you believe it, is a Korean map. So this is from Korea in 1402 AD. And this is called the Kangnido map. It shows you here. This is Korea. This is actually Japan down here. And all of this huge landmass is Ming China. India seems to be here. This is Africa. And quite amazingly, although you can't see the sea, but up here is a depiction of Europe. And in the Korean transcription, there are even phrases like Alemania, Germany. So the Koreans have some notion of what Europe and even Germany looks like and means in the early 15th century, in 1402. And look here again, north here is at the top, north, south down here. But again, for different reasons. We believe that the Chinese put north at the top of their maps because of an interesting imperial tradition. So in Chinese, the emperor is supposed to look down. Down means south. His subjects, and the emperor is nearly always male. The subjects of the emperor look up north to the emperor. So north is up, south is down. And this is what you see in this Chinese map. It's kind of extraordinary. So you might be able to hear my 6-year-old child shouting in the background. My apologies. So that's the context for different ways in which you get this orientation of the world, with east at the top in Christian traditions, north at the top in Chinese traditions. And now look at this tradition from the Islamic history. This is, I think, a most beautiful map, which we exhibited in the Bodleian. And this is a copy of a scholar called Al-Istakhi. Al-Istakhi was active in the 10th century AD. This is a copy of a world map, a lost world map that he created. So what you're looking at is a copy of Al-Istakhi, which is dated 1297 AD. If you can see this, what you have again is south is at the top, but you have this amazing geometry to this world map. This line is the Nile. So here is Egypt. Here are islands in the Mediterranean, Sicily, one is Cyprus. This is Europe, and this is Al-Andalus, so this is Muslim Spain, and this is North Africa. And this is a recurrent tradition in very early Islamic mapping, with south at the top, the Arabian Peninsula, and the emerging empire is obviously the most important space, but south very much seen at the top. And here, these are all administrative regions. Okay. So that kind of design is one that recurs throughout this period for several hundred years. This is another example from modern-day Iraqi-born Ibn Hawqal. This is a world map dated 1086 AD, and you can see a similar orientation with south at the top, but now you have a much more elaborate origins of the Nile. And again, here is Europe. This would be the Mediterranean. This is what we now call, we see the Middle East. Hopefully now you're sort of getting this notion that the Middle East is a nonsense. The idea of talking about the Middle East, okay, it's a Western invention which assumes a notion of where the North is and the South. Okay, the Middle East. It's an invention of Western map makers, but then again, West. What does West really mean as well? So we can come back to this. But this is interesting that you can see here again the encircling sea, and this would be the Indian Ocean. So I'm just going to go back to the Al-Istakhi, and you can see something of a similar design in these two traditions. Ibn Hawqal a little bit later. Now this is extraordinary, and one of the things that we do in the exhibition is make the point that much of the Arabic intellectual tradition, as I'm sure many of you sadly know, has simply been ignored within what you'd call world histories, which are often, of course, written from the Western perspective, that just has ignored many of these contributions. And as a result, many of the texts have just been lost or ignored, thankfully, until recently when they're rediscovered. And this is the most fabulous, one of the most fabulous, I think, rediscoveries recently. That this is a book, it's called The Book of Curiosities. which is dated to 1020, 1050 AD, so the 11th century. It's a Fatimid Egyptian book of the world, of cosmologies, of the stars, of the world, of sort of everything, really. An amazing book that came up for sale a few years ago. And one of the Arabic curators at the Bodleian Library was asked to take a look at it. She took a look at it. She was a woman called Emily Savage Smith. And she said, this is probably one of the most important collections of maps that we've seen for decades. And it also changes our whole understanding about the contribution of Arabic mapmaking to international mapmaking. So we don't know who made it. This is a world map, and if you're getting a bit familiar to, again, this orientation with south at the top, here again you have it. This is the origins of the Nile, this here. People were fascinated by the origins of the Nile, where it ended. This again is a representation of North Africa, Morocco down here. Now Europe much larger, this much larger representation of Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, the Mediterranean again, but amazingly we have scale bars, if you can see up here. Those of you more interested in the sort of technical scientific dimensions, this is amazing, because this is a scale bar showing scale on a world map, which shouldn't be there. There's a belief that Egyptian map makers are not working on this. Well, they were, and they were doing it in the 11th century. So you have an engagement with really cutting edge science, and also an engagement, well, I was going to say with theology, but not as much as you might see imprinted on the earlier Christian maps that I showed you earlier. And here's Mecca, just shown as part of the geography of this world picture. There's nothing more terribly explicit about its theology than that, which I think is interesting. It's there. But there isn't an attempt to be exclusive about that religious perspective. It's just being shown. And again, for this period, early 11th century, this is a really remarkable map. And I'm just going to show you another one from the Book of Curiosities. This I absolutely love. We showed this in the Bodleian exhibition as well. This is a map of the Mediterranean. And again, it draws on this very geometrical tradition within Arabic culture, that calligraphic tradition, which for me, I think makes absolute sense, because people may look at it and say, well, it doesn't show the outline of islands. All the islands in the Mediterranean here are just shown as circles. This is Sicily, this rectangle here. The bottom right-hand rectangle is Cyprus. What it interestingly shows, again, north, it's oriented with north at the top. So if you were to read round the transcription, here is what we would call the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar. You would move around here, the ports of Spain, southern France, going through to the Aegean, the Black Sea, Constantinople, Istanbul, around here, then moving round again into the Levant, again, this phrase, the Middle East, the Eastern Mediterranean seaports, all the way around here, Palestine, Egypt, and back round along the Libyan coast and back to North Africa. And this makes absolute sense. You don't need to have the outlines of the islands, because another scholar who's worked on this, a man called Yossi Rappaport, has made the point that this was a map that was created not with a compass, but with a sailing manual alongside it. So we have accounts of Arabic map makers and travelers saying that they used the sailing manuals. So once you landed on a particular island, you couldn't get the correct scale to move around that island. So you didn't need to map the coastline. You turned to your written book. You opened your written book, and you would then read how to travel around Sardinia. So all you needed was just the name of the island. So I think this is rather wonderful. It's more like a London tube map, it seems to me. So a very sophisticated way of mapping the Mediterranean. Remarkably early. no Western European Christian map makers are doing something like this in the 11th century. So I'm now moving back to Al-Idrisi, and that silver disc that I started the talk about. So I'm going to again show you here on the left that Al-Istakhi world map, which I showed you a few slides back, and on the right we're back to Al-Idrisi, and this is a world map from the book that he wrote in Sicily in 1154. And the English translation of the title, there are various ways in which it's been translated from the Arabic, but the common belief is that it should be translated as, rather wonderfully, The Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. It's a wonderful title. And that book was a book which described the entire known world in the 1140s, 1150s. And Idrisi, working here in Sicily for King Roger II, was commissioned by Roger to create the most sophisticated book of geography of its time. And as I said before, what I think is really interesting is that Roger knew that if he wanted to do that, to create the most sophisticated book of geography and maps, you needed an Arabic scholar. Because an Arabic scholar, he understood, living as he did on Sicily, an island which had been under Arab control for many hundreds of years prior to him taking over Sicily, he knew that an Arabic scholar would be able to draw on Greek mapmaking, Roman mapmaking, early Islamic mapmaking, Christian mapmaking, and fuse them all together. And because Idrisi had been such an extensive traveller and such a great scholar, he was the person that he turned to. So he created this book, The Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. And as you can see, what you have is a map which is developed from Al-Istakhi and from Ibn Hawqal. It's a bit more detailed. You can see here again, you've got south at the top. So here is sub-Saharan Africa, the Arabian Peninsula here. There's Mecca. Again, if you dropped a pin right in the center, you'd probably be there in Mecca. Europe down here, the Mediterranean, and a slightly more pronounced understanding of an Indian Ocean. This is probably Sri Lanka here. So Idrisi is drawing on all these traditions. He knew about Al-Istakhi, he knew about Ibn Hawqal, he even knew about the Greco-Roman tradition, and he talks about that in his book, The Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. So there's the map in more detail, just so that we can have a look at it, and you may want to ask questions about it afterwards. And we showed this again at the Bodleian exhibition. In fact, there are various copies of the Idrisi Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. The original text, which we believe was completed in 1154, has not survived. What we have is a manuscript copy, but clearly throughout the Islamic world, it was regarded as something very important because it was copied repeatedly. And here are two versions of it. It's kind of interesting. If you look at the one on the left, this is a copy made by Ottoman scribes in Istanbul in 1553. And the Bodleian Library has this book, a 1553 Ottoman scribal copy, and this one on the right, which is a very mysterious one, a different one. You can see the map is much more, it's quite damaged, as you can see here. But you can see again, south at the top, Europe down here, Indian Ocean here, and roughly the center of the map, again, would be focused on Mecca. So what's interesting about this, and this was a bit of digital magic that we now use to recreate this extraordinary Arabic scholar's work. In the book itself, it's a big fat book, okay, and people are still working on various aspects of its translation into European vernacular languages. It's a huge, huge book. It is the most comprehensive account of the world in the 12th century. Nowhere, nobody else, nobody working in a Christian or a Hindu or any other tradition is doing something as significant as Idrisi's book at this time. And if you leaf through it, you get this extraordinary description of the known world. And you also have these regional maps. And this is a map of Sicily. And you can see this is Sicily here on the left. And here is Sardinia, the neighboring island. The little bit just down here on the bottom left is the heel of Italy. So that's Italy, and there's Sicily, there's Sardinia. Now, Idrisi, I think, has deliberately, because he's far too much of a good map maker, not to realize that he's exaggerated the size of Sicily. And of course he has, because Roger II wants this great book of geography, and he partly wants it as a celebration of his reign, and also to show that he wants to put his mark on the map, quite literally. So Sicily is made bigger, but I think Idrisi knows that. Now, the magic of what we could do now with this book is that we could scan digitally the 70 maps. If you see on the left here, this is actually the book in a cradle in the Bodleian with one of its 70 maps open. I worked with a team called Factum Arte, who are a team of artists, technicians, digital experts who work in Madrid. And they, the man who runs it, a man called Adam Lowe, an old friend of mine, the pair of us have been obsessed with Idrisi for decades. I've known him for many, many years. And we did a deal with the Bodleian that his team could come in and they could scan the 70 maps, the 70 regional maps in the entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. We scanned all 70 maps. And as a result, and this is some of the wonder of what you can do with new technology, is we could put all those 70 maps. Can you see each tile here is one map? And we could stitch them all together digitally. Idrisi never did this, but we could now, with this technology, we did it last year in 2019, hundreds of years later, recreate a map of the world by an Arab map maker working in Sicily in 1154. And this is what's in Idrisi's head. It was never reproduced. We have the much smaller map at the front of the book. So this one on the left here, yeah, is at the front of this book that we're looking at. But when you put the regional maps together, you get this. And again, south is at the top. There's the Arabian Peninsula. There's Mecca. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, this is the United Kingdom, rather wonderfully. Actually, the transcription even describes Cornwall down here, that tip there. This is presumably Ireland. Again, France, Spain, North Africa. Over here, the origins of the Nile. Again, back here, the Mediterranean. Look at the detail. Nobody was doing this in the mid-12th century. This extraordinary detail with the Arabian Peninsula and the way in which watercourses, rivers, mountain ranges, in such incredible detail. And this is a high resolution version. I should just say this one is just C. So it's actually 69 maps. There is a 70th map, but it just shows C. So we're not too interested in that map. So this was reproduced and we put it on the wall. This is the inside of the exhibition at the Bodleian of Talking Maps, which was just finished. In this case, I was particularly proud of, so we got Factum to put the world map of Idrisi of the 70 maps stitched together on the wall here. And you can just see down here this glass case and the edge of that piece of paper. That is the 1553 Ottoman copy of the Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World. So we had it there alongside the world map and this map here. Now, what's interesting about this is that that's an amazing thing, and I was thrilled that we could do that. And there's been a huge amount of attention, quite rightly, I think, on Idrisi because of doing this exhibition and showing the importance of his contribution to map making. But we also realized we could go a bit further. So the last few minutes I'm going to show you something else that we realized that we could do, which takes me right back to the beginning of the talk. In the Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World, there is a description that Roger, so can I, oh, sorry, hold on, I'm gonna go back to that. Can I just, yeah, okay, I need to just hide that thumbnail so that I can read this. In the Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World, Idrisi describes the fact that Roger commissioned him to not only make the book itself, but to then create a silver disc that showed the boundaries and the routes and the climates of all the world. And it's this second paragraph which is particularly relevant here. Idrisi says that Roger wanted a disc that should be produced in pure silver of a large extent and of 400 Roman rattles in weight, each rattle of 112 dirhams. And when it was ready, he had engraved on it a map of the 7 climates and their lands and regions, their shorelines and hinterlands, gulfs and seas, watercourses and places of rivers, their inhabited and uninhabited parts, what distances were between each locality there, either along frequented roads or in determined miles or authenticated measurements, and known harbours according to the version appearing on the drawing board. This is Idrisi's description of this amazing silver disc that Roger II commissioned him to make. So we know that the silver disc was made, but it doesn't survive. Idrisi's book, The Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World, doesn't survive, but circulates in scribal copies throughout the Islamic world, which is why we have the Ottoman copy and some of the copies that survive. But the silver disc didn't. Roger II dies in 1154, and his Norman kingdom collapses. We believe Idrisi sort of disappears, but the story seems to be that he returns to his native land, he returns to Morocco, and disappears from the historical record, dies some years later. So what happened to the silver disc? Well, our assumption must be that the silver disc is melted down, disappears. We don't really know. I suspect it was just melted down after Roger died. However, we now had all the data to make the silver disc. So with Factum, we agreed to create the silver disc. And on the left, you see the beginnings of the ways in which we might project the data from the 70 maps, yeah, these 70 maps, taking that data and to project it onto a disk. So these were the early ways of looking at it. And then in Factum's workshops, they created machines. Can you see here the machines that are digitally milling? So they're taking the computer files of each map, and they're on the surface, rather like you would hand engrave a piece of silver. They are recreating every single mark in every single map. And the milling machines were designed specifically for this, to reproduce the hand of the craftsman who would work the silver. And these are test strips in silver. These are using different materials, but you can see they are slightly in relief. So here are the islands, these are the seas. Wonderful pieces. I actually have a little piece here. It's one of my most treasured possessions, funny enough. Sorry, my friend Adam Lowe sent my daughter a piece of this, and I just think it's the most amazing thing, because we were recreating what Idrisi did in 1154. I'm actually going to skip this because I might just play you just the end, because this is showing, because I think we should probably finish in a moment. Mikdad, are you okay? I might just play you just the end, because this is showing, because I think we should probably finish in a moment. Mikdad, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm here.
I can't quite catch you. I think my view is, because I think I've been going for about 45 minutes, I think I might skip the video and just show you the ending. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
To map. The final appearance of the map. This is a print, and it's important that we keep the Mecca in the center of the.
We keep Mecca in the center.
The challenging of the position give to them enough freedom to deform like a traditional way of engraving.
The object we've produced is not really a facsimile. It's a transformation of the data contained in the Ottoman copy, housed now in the Bodleian, which has been rethought in the workshops in Spain and put back onto a silver 2 meter in diameter disc by a totally international team working with a common goal. And if that seems to be the message for the world at the moment. We want no borders. We want international teams working on a common goal to address the pressing matters that shape and condition our world now.
That was Adam Lowe, who runs Factum, just speaking at the end, I think very movingly about the creation of the silver disc, a company which, of course, at the moment is being devastated by what's happening. As he says, a team of cosmopolitan people from all faiths, all creeds, all languages, who are finding things very, very difficult, but having created this most magical of objects. And so I sort of end, so I want to move on from that and end. And that's what we really created. So really, that's it. I mean, I end there, and hopefully what I've tried to show is that what you can do with digital technology in this way is transcend some of those ideological omissions of the Arabic and Islamic tradition, which is now, I hope, increasingly, many of us acknowledge, absolutely crucial to how we see the way in which the world's been mapped over many, many centuries, with South at the top, with Mecca at the center, which is a decision which people like Idrisi make, just in the same way as Christian map makers can make their own decisions about the way in which they put maybe East at the top of their map and they put somewhere like Jerusalem at the center. You know, I would say in the exhibition, we show the way in which different cosmologies can privilege different places and different spaces. But it's important to acknowledge many of those, and I think also celebrate somebody like Idrisi, because nobody else was doing this at this time, putting Mecca at the center of the map, but one that also acknowledged so many different traditions as well. You know, the Greek, the Roman, the Christian, we think probably even the Hindu tradition. We still don't know enough about quite what he was drawing on, but it's a remarkable thing. And so that's where I'd sort of end, and we can pick up and carry on, really, if people want to carry on having the conversation. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jerry. That was really interesting and really quite cool to see the South being at the top of a map and Mecca being in the center. Before we go on to questions, maybe I get a chance to ask the question first. It's interesting to see the UK or England quite clearly drawn in many of the early maps, and I don't like, we aren't that important. How did that, why?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's from Ptolemy. So I should say, you know, in Idrisi's book, In the Entertainment for He Who Longs to Travel the World, he talks openly about Ptolemy. He says he's learned a lot from Ptolemy, who's the Greek map maker from 150 AD. He's read his books, he's read Roman texts, he's read Christian texts. So in Ptolemy, even in 150 AD, there is an understanding of the United Kingdom. Interestingly, because even before Roman times, the interest was in tin. There was an interest in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the fact that we were quite rich in tin. So it was mapped reasonably well even at that point. So again, there's no surprise that Arabic map makers would have just inherited that tradition and know how to map that area. Because there's another interesting issue, which is just that, again, the inheritance is to show that it's right on, as it were, the edge of the world map. It's not important. It's just not important.
Yeah.
And so, maybe almost behind sort of what you're saying is the way in which, when, as it were, Christian Western map makers.
Can I get my phone?
I don't have it, sweetheart. So my 6-year-old has finally, has bombed our session. Sweetheart, do you want to go and ask mummy?
What, my pink phone? My blue phone?
Okay. Do excuse me a second.
Yeah.
I don't know, sweetheart. Shah. Can somebody? I'm just trying to do this, and Honey's come up. Can somebody please take her? Just want to go and see Mum. That was inevitable.
No problem at all.
So I think that again, what's interesting is we've, I guess, even me suggesting that the title of the talk was when Mecca is at the center of that world image, tells us that even from the Greco-Roman tradition, that region was the center of the world. When I spoke in Abu Dhabi and I said, this, it seems to me, is the center of the world, because London is an 8-hour flight west and Beijing is a 7-hour flight east. Okay. So if you're thinking about where the center of the world is, always to some extent driven by certain religious or political beliefs or imperatives, but the notion somehow that Europe is at the center of a world map is just the result of a political imperial decision, nothing else. And indeed, in these maps, right up until the 16th, 17th century, Europe, and certainly the United Kingdom, is known, is mapped, but is very much, as it were, on the edge of that world picture.
Great. We have a number of questions that have come in. Let's start with Manzur Alalji. He says, thank you for this insight. How did you start your journey to study maps in this way across different times?
It's a really good question. Thank you, because it was when I was doing my PhD, and I'd started doing a PhD actually in literature, in Renaissance, 16th, 17th century literature, and it was on maps in literature. And my PhD supervisor had said to me after a while, she said, it seems to me that the maps are more interesting, focus on the maps. And I said, but I'm not trained as a geographer and I'm not a map maker. And she said, it doesn't matter. It's all part of the culture of the time. Literature, history, geography, theology, they're all being mixed together, as many of us know, around classical scholarship in Islam and in Christianity. One would study all those disciplines. So I said, okay. And what was interesting is that as I started to look at the maps, late 15th, early 16th century maps, what I kept finding were particularly Ottoman maps. So I was looking at Turkish late 15th, early 16th century maps. And the Ottoman maps were pushing me further back and telling me that there was a story about map making that had an Arabic and an Islamic dimension, which the standard histories of map making weren't telling me. So I kept following that, and I could have shown you other maps from the Ottoman tradition. An extraordinary map maker called Pir Reis, in Turkish it just means the sort of sea commander, sea captain, who did a collection of maps in the 1520s, which are amazing, absolutely extraordinary maps of the Mediterranean that were far better than anything that the Venetians or the Portuguese were doing. So I think the last time I spoke at the mosque, I was saying that partly, I guess, my intellectual tradition coming from Bradford, being a sort of non-elite scholar in a way, from a very modest background, I didn't have the investment in that Western European story. It was partly my story, but it only was partly my story. And by following my nose and not what people told me I should or shouldn't be looking at, I suddenly discovered that the Islamic tradition was really, really important in the mapping of the period, and that, you know, throughout the 18th and 19th century, that story was ignored and was just wasn't told anymore. But it's back to even Migdad's question, but it is connected, I guess, to the question that was just asked. That, you know, Ptolemy's work, the Greek mapmaker Ptolemy, who everybody sees as the foundation stone of all geography. The book he writes is called The Geography. Is the first book called The Geography, and he shows you how to map the world. That work is done in Alexandria in 150 AD, and then the traditional story was it is rediscovered in Byzantium around the 1300s, and then it comes into Italy in the 1400s, and it's one of those classical texts which is rediscovered. This is a nonsense. What actually happens to Ptolemy's text is it goes eastwards and it goes into Islamic scientific thinking, and particularly goes to Baghdad, and is there translated and is critiqued and is refined and is changed, and then comes back through the Byzantine regions to then re-enter Europe. But the story that's told is that Ptolemy is lost for 1,000 years. He's not lost for 1,000 years. That's a Western form of scholarship that hasn't been able to track what happened to Ptolemy, but actually goes through Al-Istaghi, goes through Ibn Hawqal and various other scholars who are working on that Greek tradition with no problems. No, you know, they're interested in it because it's part of that scientific tradition. So if you're interested in map making, you're going to look at Ptolemy. So again, it's a story that we've used that's just been buried within a Western classical tradition. It's just that, you know, we know that Arabic tradition has just been quietly sidestepped, and it's changing now. I mean, I think the important thing is to do this work, to write these kind of books, to curate these kind of exhibitions, and to say, look at this material. This is really significant, really important.
Great, thank you very much. One thing to bear in mind, which has just come through, is one question from Kasia Nakowitz. She says, do you think we might ever change the world map for a less Eurocentric view, with Europe not on the top?
That's a great question, and I think that the online mapping tradition now, because all of the maps, I guess, and well, apart from the silver disc, which is also being created by digital technology, most mapping, of course, is now online. When, as anybody who's listening in here, some of you will probably say you have, but I mean, so few of us now use printed atlases, and those did create those maps. And in many people's mind's eye, created the idea of north at the top. Now I think we can use our own maps. It's absolutely, there's no reason why north should be at the top. You can invert it. You could have south at the top. It's perfectly admissible. You can still use it and navigate and move around. There's no problems with it at all. So I think it's a really interesting question, because increasingly we've just broken away from that printed map tradition, which says north, or usually north is at the top. And we don't even really use world maps as much anymore. I mean, if you ever use Google Earth, what do you see when you go on it? You see a spinning globe. And what's fascinating about it is what most people first do is they put in the coordinates of their home. So they go zooming in and they put at the center of that world themselves. So I think that's increasingly what we do now with maps. It may be that we don't care anymore, because that imperial moment, which has privileged Europe. I'm not saying it's gone away, but now mapping is much more diverse. So I'm in many ways hopeful about what online mapping will do. I'm hopeful in some ways, not in other ways, because one of the problems is that we have mapping is now, Google do maps, but their maps are really about advertising and selling things. That's the only reason those maps are there. So when I interviewed Google about this, when I was writing a book about world maps, and they were saying they only accidentally use maps because they realized that when you do online search, they worked out that nearly half of all search had some geographical component. So that's why they develop maps, because they realize that, you know, if you go online, what's the question you're typing in? You're usually saying, where is the nearest restaurant, the nearest hospital? You're asking a geographical question as much as anything else. That's why they develop maps as an adjunct to search, and it's now as important as search. So the online mapping tradition is fantastic in terms of how it's developed, but it's also very much about Google driving and generating revenue for their search engine. So I worry about that, because what if they want to knock you off the map? There were these notorious stories about the way in which they weren't mapping townships in South Africa, because why would you want to? Because they weren't economically important. And then that's rather shocking, because you think, well, you do want to map every space on the globe, however you put your map, north, south, east, or west. Goes back to pre-modern cultures. What's interesting is there are no maps that I know of, world maps by cultures, that have west at the top, for the simple reason it's rather like the Egyptian tradition, that west was seen as a scary, terrifying place because it's where the sun set. So it was a sign or a destination associated with death and darkness. So we have that phrase, go west, young man, which means to die. And north, similarly, north is interesting because it's, again, north is seen as a sign of darkness. So it's odd that north should triumph, as it were, over the top in terms of European mapping. But yeah, never west, south and east. And one of the issues why we think that somebody may be about to ask this, so sorry, I might knock out a question. I often asked, why do Islamic map makers put south at the top? And one theory, it's only a theory, is that all the communities that initially convert to Islam are due north, are directly north of Mecca. So it's easier to orient yourself south, north. So south is at the top because you know that Mecca is, as it were, straight up, it's south. So that's just one theory. Another theory is that the Zoroastrian tradition also privileged south. So we don't really know. This is, again, it is a question that's kind of interestingly open. As much as why does north triumph, there's also a question of why do most, not all, but most Islamic world maps have south at the top. But I do think it's probably something to do with that. And of course, it's very different from the question of Qibla. It's not the same question. So the whole Qibla mapping tradition is unbelievably complicated and fascinating, but is a slightly different question in terms of orientation and direction of where you are in relation to Mecca. And that's a slightly different question to the way in which the maps, the world maps, are being constructed as well. But again, fascinating.
One insight actually from an audience member is probably, I think, in relation to my question, from Ahmed Versi. He says Muslims knew about England since the 8th century, as they were invited by King Offa of Kent to help mint the high quality coins. So that could be why the UK was more shown. A couple of other questions. There are three other questions, but let's start with one. Do we know if Roger II and Al-Idrisi faced any theological opposition or criticism for their cross-cultural collaboration? And thank you very much for the brilliant insights from Muhammad.
Yeah, really good. It's a good question, because no, they don't for the collaboration. Roger II does for different reasons, but for purely Christian reasons. He's having a fight with the Pope in Rome because he's empire building in the Mediterranean, but he's empire building in this polyglot space. So when he arrives, all the mechanisms of government are all written and expressed in Arabic. We believe that he learns Arabic because he knows that that's the best way to communicate and to get things done. So the island is this incredibly polyglot space, but that has a very strong Arabic dimension. And that's why he's so pleased with Idrisi creating the book that he does, written in Arabic. And again, it tells you something really interesting about what's happening in the mid-12th century, that he feels, alongside Latin and Greek, that Arabic is the lingua franca, especially within such elite scholarship, that he wants to distribute and circulate. And I think that that's a really interesting, it goes right back to the 8th century moment. It says that's what's really important about circulating this kind of book. He doesn't ask for it to be written in Greek and Latin, because the three languages are all jostling within Sicily. We believe that many of there was an Arabic Psalter, that indeed communion and many of the liturgies, the Christian liturgies in church, were sung in Arabic. So this is a moment of cross-cultural exchange and encounter, which doesn't always last. But that's why, for me, I think it's so amazing to sort of say, here's a moment. Yes, it may have been for political ends. Roger was trying to build his reputation in Sicily, and so he turns to something like Idrisi. But again, it tells you of a moment of exchange that's going on that most people are staggered by. And you think, well, why? Because yes, there have been those moments of conflict, but we've drowned out the other moments of exchange, of accommodation, of understanding, of learning, because it's not such a good story, is it? Sadly, wars always get on the front pages. This kind of story doesn't get on the front page. And then when you create something like the silver disc, maybe it should. And so it should, a lost object, which actually reminds us that we can learn from each other and we can share ideas and that they endure.
Perfect. Okay, there are a few questions here, but I think we'll have to close at some point soon. So, do you think that the West ignored the knowledge of Muslims in this space because of ignorance or because of racism?
I think initially there's more of a competitive issue. I think there's a sense in which Islam is the competitor for power, wealth, influence. Certainly, I think in the 15th century, there's more of it's not a racism, because I think this is why it's so complicated about the history, that we have to maybe rethink it, that, it's competitive. Roman Christian belief is watching in the 15th century in utter disarray at the power, the sophistication, and the spread, the irresistible spread of Islam, which I don't need to tell this audience how powerful and how quick and how enduring that tradition is. Within a couple of hundred years, is reaching into Northwest Africa. I mean, that's an extraordinary expansion of an empire driven by faith, which is just phenomenal. Christianity divided, dare I say, riven with sickness and plague. In terms of what's currently going on, it's interesting again to look back into this history and see that Christianity is thinking this is a culture that we have to respect and admire, which then leads, I think, to fear and anxiety. And then increasingly in subsequent centuries then leads, yes, indeed, to racism around the impact of imperialism and the spread of imperialism. But within this period, I think that the story should be told slightly differently. Yes, I think that's quite right later. But here, no, I think it's an anxiety. It's a competitive response to a fear about a more sophisticated culture. And I think that that's something that has always sat there. I think it's always sat there. I think it's the root of many of the Western anxieties. Actually, I think about Islam is just one thing. It's just my theory. Others may have a different view on it, but I think that that's been part of the issue. The fact of the power, the sophistication, the long history, the cosmopolitan nature of Islam in these early centuries. It's just my theory. I'm sure it could be.
So if someone wanted a map at home, so this is from Mcdullis area, if someone wanted a map at home which helped us understand the world, is there a projection or a map of some sort that you would recommend, and where would you get it from?
That's a great question. Because, I mean, so this isn't sort of advertising or anything, but I wrote this book called A History of the World in 12 Maps, and the Idrisi was one of the 12 maps. And I end with Google and just make the point that that's the weird paradox, that we can't live without a world map in many ways, but yet all world maps are partial. They all make decisions about what they include and what they leave out. Any map does. The only map that wouldn't is a map that is on the scale of 1 to 1, and that would be the size of the world. So there's been all kinds of debates about this. I mean, the famous map which seems to represent a sort of European imperial tradition is the famous Mercator projection. And Mercator's projection is invented in 1569. He's a Flemish, Northern European map maker. I don't think he was very Eurocentric, but the map got taken over, particularly in the 19th century, vastly inflated Europe, putting it at the center, diminishing Southeast Asia and Africa and Latin America. And then in the 1970s, a German socialist called Arno Peters produced another map called the Peters projection, which claimed to be about equal area. And he explicitly said this was a more politically fair map. And you can look it up. It's Arno Peters, the Peters projection. It was famously in the West Wing. There's an episode of the West Wing, which is quite funny, where they talk about the Peters projection. But the Peters projection as well is partial in what it selects. And it shows north at the top as well. So it seems to me, there is no impartial, flat rectangular map of the world, because you can't literally square the circle. The Earth is a globe, and Idrisi writes about this very elegantly. He describes exactly the dimensions of the Earth as a globe in 1154. But the globe has no boundaries. Yeah, the globe has no north or south or east or west. And that's the problem, that any map maker who tries to flatten it out is always using his or her subjective views in terms of how they create that world picture. So I'm sorry, I don't really have an answer. I just think you must always be skeptical about any world map that you're shown, because it will always come with some bias, some presumption about what it wants you to believe. So never believe a world map.
Thank you very much. I think, to be honest, I think that's it. There are a couple of other questions, but I think we've taken a lot of your time this evening. Thank you very much for joining us digitally, and we look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon when all of this is over.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always,
yeah,
it's such a pleasure. So really, thank you, and thank you everybody who did this digitally and came in and listened. I really appreciate it. So as ever, but yes, please, let's do this face to face again. Some other subject, but we'll find something, Dad. But thank you again, because it really is a real pleasure. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just if you'd like to find out more about our programs, which we still do have digitally, look at sikkim.org.uk and you'll find out on the mailing list, and you'll see our ongoing programs as they continue. Thank you very much. And we'll end there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Night.